No such thing as a mixtape no more. I was just on Facebook, and I don't even know why I get caught up in these Facebook comments and conversations sometimes with people because they just go back and forth forever. So I seen there was someone asking about someone put a post up and it said, "What happened to Designer?" And Designer is a rapper who, if you don't know, he just came out with a hit song last year. It was a major hit song. It was called Panda, and sold maybe 3, 4, 5 million records. It was one of the biggest songs of the year. The song really went mainstream. It was a big song. I mean, it was on the charts, number one for a while. Kanye West used it on his album, and it was a big song. So a year goes by, Designer's starting to look like a one hit wonder, and everyone's wondering, what happened to him? Where is he at? Of course, he's making money. He's still doing shows. He has a Lamborghini. Those royalty checks started coming in. So I'm sure he's good. I'm not here to say, oh, he's washed up or he's a one hit wonder. Nah, this isn't what the conversation is about. I'm sure financially, Designer is good right now. Probably a millionaire, made millions of dollars, despite whether he signed a 360 deal or whatever. He's making millions of dollars. But the reason I'm talking about this video is someone said, what's up with his album? And that's when I responded. I said, they was like, why hasn't he come out with an album yet? And I responded and I said, he did come out with an album. It was called New English. From what I see, it's not still on the hip hop charts. It's not still in the top 200, which tells me that it was a flop or it wasn't like a hit album or it wasn't a classic. Because usually, if you come out with a classic album, at least even for at least if you're hot for the year and your album is somewhat decent, you'll remain on the top 200 charts in your genre for at least the next year or two if you come out with a good album. But if not, it'll leave the top 200 charts in no time. So basically, Designer's album New English, it was a flop. If you ask me, I don't know what the exact sales were. I know he had that one Panda song, and the song did amazing. But as far as his album, from what I see, it was a flop. I didn't really hear about it. I didn't hear about it. Usually, if it's a good album, it's a whole bunch of dope songs. You'll hear the follow up. You'll hear the next song. But it was a flop, and I'm not here to bash Designer. So so then I tell the person he came out with New English, and then they're like, oh well, that wasn't an album, that was a mixtape. And that's when I told them, a mix, how was that a mixtape? Mixtapes don't exist no more. And that's what I want to talk about, that mixtapes don't exist no more. First of all, a mixtape, the word mixtape originates from a tape, a cassette tape. No one listens to cassette tapes anymore. So why are people still calling it a mixtape? It's definitely not a mixtape. And then the mixtapes transitioned into mix CDs, which were mixtapes, and we called it mixtapes. And a mixtape was something that was put out independently by artists. Usually it had some real cheesy artwork on it, and it was designed by one of those artwork. There was a few real good artwork designers, and they just designed mixtape covers. And usually the mixtape will consist of remixes to popular songs on the radio. For example, 50 Cent, he was probably the last artist to really use the mixtape and to really come out with mixtapes. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of artists who come out with mixtape, but I'm talking about the last person I know of that really used the mixtape, quote unquote, form to be successful was 50 Cent. After 50 Cent, there wasn't any more mixtape. The mixtape had beats on it that were unauthorized. Usually, sometimes they would find ways to lower. They wouldn't even have the instrumentals. They would find ways to lower the vocals of the original song, and then they would just rap over them. The beats were unauthorized, and you definitely couldn't sell a mix. You couldn't sell a mixtape because, like I said, these beats were unauthorized. You couldn't put a mixtape in stores, and they weren't on stores. They were on the streets. You'd have to buy a mixtape on the streets, usually from a bootlegger, African, or somebody who would burn copy mixtapes and resell them. But the mixtape, that format doesn't exist anymore. People don't listen to tapes. People don't even really listen to CDs anymore. So that doesn't exist. There's no such thing as a mixtape, especially when your so-called mixtape is being released by a major label. I mean, this guy's signed to Kanye's label, Good Music, and this guy's signed to Def Jam. How are you putting out a mixtape and you're signed to Def Jam? Def Jam don't put mixtapes out; they put albums out. Now, what I told the guy was in his response when he told me, "Oh, well, that was a mixtape. That wasn't an official album." I said, "I bet you if that shit sold 3 million, they would have been calling that an album. They only call it a mixtape when it's a flop. A mixtape is a safe way to put out music, and then if it doesn't really perform well, you can say, oh, well, the shit was a mixtape. Nah, that's bullshit. If you put out a project, it's called a project. If you put out a project and the shit sells 1 million, you're gonna be called that shit is an album. Anytime you put out music, original music with original beats, uh, whether you made the beat or whether you got them for a producer, anytime you put out original music, that shit is an album or that's a project or an EP. That's not a mixtape. The mixtape doesn't exist anymore. Lil Wayne used to put out mixtapes, and I think he still does. But he takes other people's beats, and usually mixtapes aren't for profit. Mixtapes were never really for profit. It was strictly a promotional tool. It wasn't some um oh, I'm putting out a mixtape on Def Jam. Like that shit doesn't even exist. You can't put out a mixtape on Def Jam. If you put out albums, these guys look at the artwork. If you look at the artwork on that New English, that shit is some high quality shit. That looks like some Picasso shit. Mixtape artwork never looked like that. Never. I don't know anybody that released no mixtape with no artwork that looked like that. But like I said, you in the studio. Mixtapes used to be performed in garages and fucking basements and on shitty mics. It was just a way to put out your art, promotional tool to put on the streets. It was a way to get your shit out there. It was a tape. Now all this shit is digital. There's no mixtape no more. There's no mixtape. I could go on and on and about this, but there's no mixtape. People use that term now, or these artists that are out now, they use that term to get away with putting out garbage. And then they say, oh, well, it didn't sell a lot. And they say, oh, it was a mixtape. So, oh, my album coming soon. Yeah, album ain't coming soon. It's like, your album is coming when you could come out with 3, 4, 5 hit songs. And then there's a demand and people want to buy your album. Little Uzi, for example, he had a real hot song. He had that EXO Tour Life song, and that shit was going fire. And he was about to put out another project, and he's real hot, and he has a bunch of singles that people like, and he's anticipated. So they dropped a project, and that shit is on fire, and it did 100, 200,000, whatever it did the first week. That shit is an album. They're not calling that no mixtape. It's only a mixtape when that shit flops. All right, I'm done. Buy my book, How to Make It in the Music Business Using Social Media Marketing to Build a Large Following. I'm not trying to sound like a hater. I'm just talking shit. This kind of information isn't in my books. These are just the free podcast videos I'm putting out where I'm talking about music and subjects other people probably aren't talking about. But yeah, this is just for fun, entertainment. I'm not hating on design or anything like that. I wish him the best. He's from my hometown, Brooklyn. So I'm not hating. I'm just saying the mixtape don't exist no more. So y'all need to stop using that term. Just put out music, put out good projects, put out EPs, whatever the fuck you want to call it. But it's definitely not a mixtape no more. The mixtape doesn't exist. We don't use cassettes. We don't really use CDs no more based off the new stats I've been looking at. And it's not a mixtape no more. Call it what it is. It's an album. And if your album doesn't sell, just keep working at it. Just keep putting out more music. But let's stop calling it a mixtape because it's not a mixtape. Mixtapes don't exist anymore.